The knock came just after 7 a.m., sharp and uninvited. I was still in my robe, coffee halfway brewed, when I opened the door to see my son Nolan and his wife Bryn standing there with suitcases. No, hello? No, can we come in? Just Nolan's flat voice. We sold the house. We'll be staying with you. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd misheard him. But then Bryn smiled, tight, smug, and said, "You're lucky we even picked your house." She stepped in without waiting for me to respond, her designer luggage wheels scratching against the hardwood I'd refinished myself 2 summers ago. I stood there, hand still on the doorknob, watching the two of them move like it had already been decided. "Is the guest room clean?" she asked, not even looking back at me. "We'll need space for my office, too." I closed the door behind them and said nothing. I hadn't been told they were selling their house, I hadn't been asked if they could move in, and I sure hadn't been given a moment's warning to make room for their mess. Nolan wandered into the kitchen like he still lived here, pulled open my fridge, and poured himself a glass of orange juice. I noticed he used my favorite glass, the one with the little sunflower decal that had faded over time. Bryn set her purse on the hall table like it belonged there. "You should think about updating this place," she said. "Feels very sentimental." That word, sentimental, curled around my spine like an insult. I forced a breath through my nose and asked, "What happened? Why sell the house?" "Oh, it was time," Bryn said breezily. "We got a great offer, and honestly, maintaining a home was exhausting. This will be simpler. Simpler for them." I watched Nolan settle in like nothing had shifted, but I knew better. Something had. Something sharp and permanent. And while they unpacked their bags, I reached quietly for the drawer where I kept the old documents, just to see if I still had what I thought I did. The next morning, I made coffee early, earlier than usual. I needed the quiet before they woke, before Bryn's perfume took over my kitchen, and Nolan started using my cups like they were disposable. I stood by the sink, watching the steam rise, when Bryn came in barefoot, scrolling her phone like she lived there. "We got $480, she said out of nowhere. Not bad considering the market. I turned slowly from the counter. She didn't look up. "Of course, and we didn't even have to fix the water heater. Buyer waived inspection." I sat down. "And where is it now?" Bryn finally glanced at me. "What do you mean?" "The money, Bryn. What did you do with it?" She blinked like it was an odd question. "It's gone mostly." Then came the list. Effortless, casual. A week in Napa for a mental reset. The boutique fund. Amber needed a partner. Down payment for my SUV. Paid off some of my mom's cards. New patio set we never even used, to be honest. Nolan gave a little to his friend for crypto, but that tanked. She sipped my coffee like it was hers. We wanted a clean slate. I stared at the edge of the table, the nick from where Nolan once slammed his math book in frustration. That table had seen more discipline than either of them lately. "You do remember," I said slowly, "that I loaned you $40,000 to buy that house." Bryn waved her hand. "It was a gift. You said you didn't want it back if it helped us get started." "I said I wouldn't press you," I corrected. "Not that it wasn't real." She shrugged. "You're lucky to have us here, Deborah. We just need a little time to regroup." "Lucky." I swallowed the burn in my throat and stood. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. I knew then I'd have to find that document. Not to argue. Not yet. Just to know it was still mine. I spent the afternoon folding towels in the den. The sun was pouring in through the side window, catching the threadbare spots I always meant to mend but never did. My hands moved in rhythm, fold, press, stack, while the voices from the hallway drifted in and out of earshot. Bryn was on the phone again, something about paint colors and wallpaper samples. "I want the guest room to feel less dated," she said. "Maybe something coastal, lighter tones. That dark wood is depressing." I heard Nolan mumble something in response, but I didn't catch it. I kept folding. 3 loads. 2 sheets I had just washed yesterday. A few of my sweaters that I didn't remember leaving in the dryer. I kept folding because it gave me a reason to stay still. Bryn came in briefly, trailing perfume and a mood. "I'll be revamping the guest room," she announced like a news anchor, "thinking of turning it into my personal space, meditation, journaling, light consulting." I nodded. Not yes, not no, just nodded. She must have taken that as agreement because she was already talking about hiring someone to move the bed. When she left the room, I set the last towel down and stood there for a long moment, not frozen, just processing. They'd sold the house I helped them buy, spent nearly $500,000 on nonsense, and now she wanted to gut my guest room like it was a project on some show. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I walked to the hall closet, the one with the old shoeboxes, sewing kit, and broken umbrella, and pulled out the tan file folder near the back. It was dusty, but still sealed. Inside was the copy of the loan agreement Nolan had signed 8 years ago, back when he still said thank you, and meant it. I slipped it under the phone book in the drawer by the fridge. I wasn't planning a war. Not yet, but I was done pretending nothing had been taken. I waited until dinner dishes were done. Nolan was scrolling on his phone in the living room, half watching a game. Bryn had just poured herself another glass of wine and was flipping through some catalog on the armrest like it was her house and her couch. I dried my hands on the dish towel, folded it in half, and hung it on the oven handle the way I always do. Then I walked into the room and stood where they both could see me. "I need you to start looking for another place," I said. "You can't stay here." Nolan looked up slowly. "What?" Bryn let out a laugh that snapped sharp through the air. "You're not serious." "I am." She blinked at me, confused for half a second. Then she stood, arms crossed, that familiar tilt to her head. "You're telling your own son to leave his childhood home?" "No," I said. "I'm telling 2 grown adults who made reckless decisions with nearly $500,000 and never asked for permission that they cannot take over my life because they ran out of money." Nolan's mouth opened, then shut. Bryn stepped forward, pointing her wineglass at me like it was a weapon. "You ungrateful woman! We chose your house. We're giving you company, helping you feel useful." "You don't get to frame this as generosity," I said calmly. "You took, and now you need to leave." She didn't say another word, just stepped closer, and before I could move, she slapped me across the face. The sting landed hard, but not surprising. It was quick and shallow, a cheap blow. I didn't flinch. I looked past her through the open blinds. 2 of my neighbors had paused mid-walk. Their eyes met mine. They'd seen. I turned without a word, walked to the kitchen, picked up my coffee, and sipped. Then I set it down, reached for the phone, and scrolled past every number I no longer used until I found the one I'd saved under a fake name years ago. I pressed call. "Martin Hollis speaking." "Martin," I said, "it's Deborah Holstead. I need legal advice." Martin met me at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. I chose the booth by the window, the same one I used to sit in with Nolan when he was little, back when chocolate chip pancakes solved everything. He slid in across from me, glanced at the folder I placed on the table, and didn't say anything right away. "I've been holding on to this for 8 years, I said, tapping the edge. "Didn't think I'd ever need it." He opened the folder carefully. Inside was the signed promissory note, $40,000, dated and notarized. Nolan's signature still strong and sure. Next to it, I had printed out a screenshot from the family group chat. Bryn had typed it in all caps. "It's gone. We blew through it. I don't care." Martin's eyes moved between the 2 documents, then back to me. "You kept everything." "Every line," I said. "Every receipt I co-signed, every account I helped them open, just in case." He leaned back, lips pressed. "You have a case, Deborah. Financial recovery, certainly. Possibly civil assault, too, if we want to pursue it." "I do," I said, "on both counts." He nodded slowly. "You're not looking for a settlement." "I'm looking for a message. I didn't need revenge. I needed them to understand they couldn't rewrite reality just because I stayed quiet. My silence wasn't surrender. It was patience. Martin began outlining next steps, but I barely heard him. My fingers rested on the edge of the folder, steady now. The weight that had lived in my chest for months, maybe years, had shifted. Not gone, but different. "I'll file the paperwork this week," he said. "They'll be served directly." I didn't smile. There was no triumph in this, just clarity. As I stood to leave, Martin added, "Be prepared for pushback." "I've been pushed enough," I said. At home, I opened the front door to find Bryn standing in the hallway, holding a measuring tape against the guest room wall. She looked over her shoulder. "You think a mirror would open this space up?" I looked her in the eye. "No," I said, "but the door will." The next morning, I waited until they left for whatever errands they had decided were urgent. Bryn was wearing a fur-lined jacket, far too warm for spring, and carrying a bag she hadn't owned 2 weeks ago. Nolan followed behind her, phone in hand, not even saying goodbye. I sat down at my desk in the corner of the den, opened my laptop, and started typing. First, the name Eloine and Company. That was the boutique Bryn had mentioned, her business partner Amber's dream that she'd poured her heart into. The website looked clean, curated, and vague. Lots of inspirational quotes, a coming soon tag on the storefront tab. But something felt off. I dug a little deeper. Business registry, state filings, local tax records. The LLC was real enough, filed 6 months ago, but there were no sales permits listed, no tax filings, no reviews, no location on the map, just a mailing address that linked to a P.O. box in Nevada. I searched Bryn's name next, and that's when I found it. A court record from Arizona dated 4 years back. Civil suit allegation, financial misrepresentation during a failed startup investment. The plaintiff claimed Bryn had promised returns, gathered money from 3 families, and never delivered anything. The case had been settled quietly with a sealed agreement, but it was there in black and white. I leaned back, heart slow but steady. Not anger, just confirmation. The gut feeling I'd swallowed every time she smiled too hard, talked too fast, dressed too rich for their budget. This wasn't a bad streak. This was a pattern. I printed the documents and slipped them into the folder with the promissory note. Then I placed the folder back in the kitchen drawer under the calendar. They weren't going to gaslight me into doubt, not with history, not with charm, and not with crocodile tears when the envelope arrived. That afternoon, Bryn returned alone. She tossed a shopping bag on the table and called out, "We'll need more closet space." I wiped my hands on a dish towel, opened the drawer, and checked that everything was still there. The envelope came by courier, hand-delivered, signature required. I signed without a word, thanked the young man, and brought it inside. Thick paper, gold seal, exactly what it needed to be. I didn't rush to show them. Let the day pass. Let the sun hang a little longer in the window before everything shifted. By late afternoon, the silence was too much to ignore. I heard the front door open with force. Heavy footsteps. Nolan. I was in the kitchen wiping down the counter when he appeared in the doorway, holding the opened envelope like it was poison. "Why are you doing this, Mom?" His voice cracked, not with sorrow, but disbelief, like I'd betrayed some unspoken pact. I didn't flinch. "Do you remember who co-signed your house loan?" He blinked but didn't answer. "Do you remember who sold her engagement bracelet so you could finish grad school when your scholarship ran dry?" He looked away. "Do you remember the woman who skipped her knee surgery because the insurance deductible was too high after your emergency room bill?" "Mom, come on!" "I do," I said, setting the cloth down. "I remember her, and I think it's time you do too." Bryn's voice pierced through the front window. She was in the car, yelling without dignity. "You're ruining your own family! We trusted you!" I walked to the door, opened it just enough for her to see my face. "I trusted you too." Nolan stood awkwardly on the porch, eyes darting between me and the sidewalk. I waited for something, anything, to suggest he remembered who I was before Bryn's voice replaced mine in his life. But nothing came. So I stepped back and shut the door. Not a slam, just enough pressure to mark the boundary that had long been overdue. The sound echoed in my chest longer than it did in the room. I locked the handle, drew the curtain, and turned back toward the kitchen. The kettle was still warm. I poured myself a cup and opened the calendar drawer. The next envelope was ready, just in case they still didn't understand. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I didn't need to. Word moves faster in a small town than wildfire in August. By the end of the week, I noticed the shift. Fewer waves from across the street, but longer stares. Then came the knock on my side door. It was Helen Kessler, holding a brown paper bag with 3 still warm scones from her oven. She said she just made too many, but the pause in her voice said she knew. Helen never bakes too many of anything. I thanked her, and she squeezed my arm before walking off. Bryn called it an overreaction when she stormed back through the house later that evening, loud enough for the neighborhood to hear. "Imagine suing your own son over a misunderstanding," she muttered as she slammed the fridge. "Pathetic." But I saw the texts, quiet messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, saw what's going on. "You don't have to explain if you're drawing a line. Deborah, something big happened. We trust you." People remembered things I'd forgotten. Notarizing last-minute wills for neighbors after hours, watching grandkids while their parents rushed to job interviews, organizing food drives every December. Even the one where I stood in the freezing rain to collect canned soup and gloves. They remembered I didn't need applause. I just needed the silence around me to feel less empty. Saturday morning, I went out to plant mums along the edge of the yard. The sun was gentle, the earth soft from the rain 2 days prior. My knees ached, but not enough to stop me. Halfway through, I looked up and saw Mrs. Alvarez from across the street wave from her porch. I waved back, and she held it just long enough for me to feel it. Real, quiet support. For the first time in weeks, I smiled without forcing it. Inside, I washed my hands and made a fresh pot of coffee. The court date was coming, and I wanted to be ready, not just on paper but in spirit, and I was closer than they thought. The courthouse smelled the same as it always had: bleach, paper, and nervous sweat. I'd spent enough of my working life inside these walls to know the rhythm of these rooms. But today, I wasn't notarizing someone else's mess. I was standing in my own. Bryn walked in first, late by 10 minutes, dressed like she thought cameras might be waiting. Designer sunglasses, heels too high for the marble floors, and that same dismissive tilt of her chin. Nolan trailed behind her, shoulders hunched, not even glancing my way. He looked like a boy who knew he'd disappointed someone, just not enough to say it aloud. I sat when they did, no greetings, no acknowledgement, just 3 names on a docket and one truth that wouldn't stay buried. When our case was called, I stood. My knees didn't shake. I handed the judge 3 items. First, the promissory note, $40,000, signed and dated from a time when my son still believed in paper promises. Second, the chat log screenshots of Bryn mocking me in the family group thread, saying she blew through it all and would never pay the old woman back. Third, the printouts, the business registry showing Elowin and Company as a hollow shell. No storefront, no taxes filed, a company built on branding, not truth. The judge took his time, flipped through every page, then looked up at Bryn. "This isn't just poor money management," he said evenly. "This is calculated misuse of funds and a clear failure to repay a legal loan. And the tone in these messages, frankly, it's damning." Bryn opened her mouth to speak, but the judge raised a hand. "You'll have your chance in civil court," he said. "But from where I'm sitting, this isn't going away quietly." Nolan still hadn't looked at me. He rubbed his temple, then his knee, like he could distract himself from the truth unraveling in front of him. The judge continued outlining the timeline for formal proceedings. I nodded. I'd waited long enough for a table where someone actually listened. When it was done, I stood, thanked the court, and walked out into the afternoon sun, and I knew exactly what I needed to do next. The locksmith came early, just after sunrise. I didn't hover. I just handed him the old keys, watched him work, and signed the invoice when he was done. 3 doors, 3 new keys, 1 copy I kept in my nightstand, the others tucked into envelopes marked for people I trust. A week later, Nolan came by. I heard the familiar shuffle of his shoes on the porch, the short pause, the rattle of a key trying to fit. Once, then again, harder, then silence. I watched from the kitchen window just behind the curtain. His hand rested on the knob like it might change its mind. He looked thinner than I remembered, or maybe just smaller. After a few seconds, he stepped back, turned around, and walked toward his car without knocking. I didn't move, didn't wave, just turned back toward the sink and rinsed my cup. The house was quiet now, the kind of quiet you feel in your bones. Not empty, just still, clean, mine again. I vacuumed the guest room that afternoon, dusted the windowsills, and folded the extra blanket at the foot of the bed. No one would be staying there anytime soon, but it felt right to keep it ready. Later, I sat on the porch with my coffee, watching birds rustle through the dogwood tree like they had for years before the shouting and slammed doors. I breathed in slow, like I'd been holding it too long. Inside, I pulled out my will and made the changes official. No more vague family clauses. No more hoping someone would grow into decency. The cabin would go to a shelter for women over 60, women like me. The rest of the estate split between a legal aid fund and a nonprofit that helped grandmothers raise their grandkids when their own children couldn't be trusted. I signed it in ink, steady and unshaken. Then I made another pot of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened the window just enough to feel the breeze move through the screen. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't brace myself for footsteps behind me.